if you're a huge manga fan, chances are you've never seen a professional manga artist at work. Have you ever wondered what goes into the making of a manga? Or what kinds of stylistic touches, techniques, and tools are important to each manga artist? Today, we'll be visiting the studios of two manga artists to take a look at some of the tricks of the trade they incorporate into their manga.
Our first featured manga artist is Aya Kano, who writes manga geared towards girls. One of her best-known manga is Requiem of the Rose King, a work of historical fiction that she penned over the course of 9 years starting in 2013. What is interesting about this manga is that it is based on one of Shakespeare's most famous history plays. Requiem of the Rose King tells the tale of Richard III, who is portrayed as a villain in Shakespeare's titular play. But in Kano's hands, the character is transformed into an entirely new and fascinating character.
I've always loved history ever since I was a girl. So when I got to see Henry VI on stage, it was such an incredible experience for me. And then after that, I began to lose myself in one Shakespearean play after another. Over time, I began to think about what I would have added to the play if I were writing it. This is something that a lot of manga artists do. These ideas just naturally start popping into your head.
Manga making is generally divided into 4 stages: drafting, sketching, inking, and depending on how the manga is printed, toning or coloring. Drafting in manga involves creating a rough outline of how everything will look in the end. The outline presents a general idea of the division of panels on each page, the composition in each panel, and the size of the speech balloons and text boxes.
This is where I get to go crazy with my ideas. It's probably the hardest part of creating a manga, but for me it's the most fun part. I mean, even when I'm struggling for ideas, it feels like fun, honestly.
The manga artist then sketches the manga based on the completed draft. Kano uses a mechanical pencil. She will keep working on a drawing until she gets it just right. Sometimes she will flip over a drawing and draw the exact same image on the back of the drawing.
There's a certain angle of the face that I'm not that great at drawing. I think everyone has one of those. And when I'm drawing a face from the front, I want to make sure I haven't ruined the symmetry. Drawing a mirror image on the back helps me make sure I've gotten the details right.
Even during this stage, Kano will still sometimes try to change something that was in her draft.
With every manga, I'm constantly redrawing things, like a little bit here and a little bit there. Usually it's okay because I'm still in the sketching stage, but sometimes I might decide to change something at the very last minute.
Manga making is very much a team effort. For example, Kano has assistants who are tasked with penning the borders of the panels, speech balloons, and text boxes. Another important task that is usually assigned to assistants is drawing the details in the background of each panel.
Finally, the manga artist inks the work. As the name implies, this involves adding ink lines over the sketches. Inking can be done with any kind of pen, but different pens produce different effects, depending on the type of nib that is used. Kano personally likes to use a type of dipping pen known as a mapping pen.
With a mapping pen, I can draw very thin lines like this. I think that thin lines give my drawings a toughness and rigidity. They're not floaty or wispy. I like that dry quality, and that's why I use mapping pens in my manga making.
An increasing number of professional manga artists create their work entirely with digital tools. However, Kanno still drafts, sketches, and inks her manga the old-fashioned way.
When I try to ink my manga using digital methods, I just can't replicate the qualities of my current style. They're just not there.
Once Kanno has finished inking her work, she scans it onto her computer. She then adds toning to complete her manga. The 4 stages of manga making all contribute towards creating a work of high quality. But which stage does Kanno feel is the most important?
Oh, wow, that's a hard one. When I'm drafting, I'm coming up with the story, and so I feel like I'm giving instructions to myself. Then, when I'm sketching out the manga, I'm trying to meet those instructions as best I can. In a way, it's like one half of my brain telling the other half what to do. And I'm over here trying to make sure both halves are working at full capacity.
While entertaining in its own right, Requiem of the Rose King also deals seriously with issues such as family relations and gender in a way that feels contemporary. The manga became a hit and was adapted into an anime and translated into several languages. As a result, Kanno was able to touch the lives of readers around the world.
How should I put it? It's not an easy job, but I think it's incredible that you get to draw whatever you want, even if you don't have much money. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. You can create an amazing, epic story all by yourself and put it out into the world. I think that's incredible and really wonderful.
Our second featured manga artist is Kenji Taketomi. He has been penning manga since his debut in 1997. He currently produces a serialized manga called Ancient Warrior Hanawat. The story revolves around demons of destruction that have begun appearing throughout Japan, and a hero who battles them while fitted in a legendary set of armor made out of clay. The design of both the demons and the set of armor are based on ancient Japanese earthenware artifacts. You may be surprised to hear that Taketomi has been working on this story since he was a child.
I began drawing manga with this character when I was a kid, and back then he was just a pure superhero. Then in my late teens, I created the prototype for the current manga about a superhero fighting monsters, based respectively on artifacts known as Haniwa and Dogu. But it was only the last 10 years or so that I began really developing the story, basically by adding content and style that feel relevant today.
Like all manga artists, the first step that Taketomi takes in drawing his manga is creating a rough draft.
For me, a rough draft is where I create the flow and energy of the story. I basically zip through it, so most of it is pretty rough. With Haniwat, I didn't really bother to create a detailed outline or anything like that before I began working on it. I mostly just work out the story in my head and figure out the plot as I go along. You know, chapter by chapter.
Having completed his rough draft, Taketomi moves on to sketching his manga on sheets of drafting paper. This figurine based on the design of Hanawat was made by Taketomi himself. He keeps the figurine nearby at all times so he can use it as a model when drawing Hanawat in action or when he needs to sketch his face in close-up. With the manga finally sketched out, Taketomi moves on to inking the story he has created. Interestingly, Taketomi doesn't refer to this process as inking. Instead, he calls it painting. As you can see, Taketomi inks his manga using brushes instead of pens.
There actually was a time when I was doing everything by pen. And I guess because I'd been doing it for so long, inking by pen just didn't feel exciting anymore. I felt like I was doing it out of necessity, not fun. So I was visiting the studio of Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, who I happen to know. Everyone knows him from Gundam The Origin, obviously, but he's also famous for using brushes in his work. I gave him a compliment about that, and he gave me a bunch of brushes.
Taketomi decided to give it a try and discovered that inking by brush complemented his art style very well. And so, he's been using brushes to ink Ancient Warrior Hanuat since the very beginning.
Manga is a unique medium because a single line can sometimes influence the story you're trying to tell. That's especially true when you're working with brushes like I am. Depending on the brush I choose and style I end up drawing in, the story could swerve into a completely new direction.
For the backgrounds, Taketomi has his assistants ink them on separate sheets of paper so he can scan them and digitally place them behind his characters.
My assistants really put in a lot of work right from the start, so the background art in Haniwa ended up becoming a lot more detailed than I was expecting. At first, I just kind of went along with it, not really wanting to discourage my assistants. But then I discovered that some scenes just work better if I fiddle around with the background a bit on the computer so that it matches the style and tone of the characters in the foreground, which I paint with a brush. Even if it's a panel where drawing the background is pretty straightforward, I have my assistants draw the background on a separate sheet of paper, which I then digitally edit and slot in behind my characters.
However, when it comes to screen tone, Taketomi continues deploying the technique the old-fashioned way, even when many artists choose to do it digitally.
For old-school screen tone, you have to do it by hand or it just doesn't feel right. It's just as precise and expressive a technique as drawing or inking. For example, you can create a very specific effect by choosing whether to cut the texture sheet along the line or not, and by how and where you scrape off the texture you've applied. I also happen to love the process. Sure, doing it by hand isn't the most efficient way to go about doing it, but for me, there's just something irreplaceable about old-school screen tone.
Taketomi says that there are still many stories to tell in the adventures of Ancient Warrior Hanuat. The work has a special place in his heart, and you can tell by the way he pays homage to the many genres of manga he has read throughout the years.
There are some scenes that could have come straight out of a girl's comic book. Some scenes have a sense of realism, while others are much more comic bookish. It all fits in with the manga's concept of everything coming together and coexisting. I really want to see more manga that hop between different genres and offer a lot of variety. Basically manga that are both thematically and artistically diverse. That's what I'm trying to do with my manga.